Good Tuesday evening, everybody. Rob O'Connor here from RobVenoSports.com with a very special Week 12 early look, Week 11 look back at some of the crazy upsets that we saw. And we are recording live on a Tuesday night, so Rob and myself will also break down the newest playoff rankings, which are due out any moment now. To do all of this, need to welcome in the founder of RobVenoSports.com, none other than Rob Veno himself. Rob, how are you this week?
Hey, Rob, how are you? I'm doing great, buddy.
I mean, I don't even know where to begin. There's just so much that we saw on what really looked like a pretty boring Saturday going in. A lot of big spreads on some of these upsets. Clemson, a 3-touchdown favorite. Michigan, a 3-touchdown favorite. Auburn, right around the double-digit favorite, 9.5, 10. Washington at home, a little bit over a touchdown favorite, 7.5, 8. And all four of those teams I just mentioned lost outright. And pretty shocking. We're going to see the rankings come out here in just a little while. Before we get to those and our projections and what we could see happening, let's just take a look at each of these four games for a couple of minutes. We'll start with Pitt and Clemson, a very big loss in terms of Clemson having the unblemished record and in terms of them winning the ACC. Probably not going to be a huge deal. It's just now a matter of them not having the perfect record. Where would they slot in? And just on the field, though, first off, what happened with Clemson on Saturday? We've seen it a couple times this year where they haven't looked great, and it really came back to bite them on Saturday.
Yeah, it really did, Rob. I mean, just from a statistical standpoint, when you see a home team favored the size Clemson was, 21.5 points, and you see 630 total yards offense, you don't expect to see a straight-up loss attached to that. But that's what happened. And like you say, we've seen close games out of Clemson. I think back to the North Carolina State game where NC State had a chance to win in regulation with a field goal. But that was really due to a lot of Clemson offensive mistakes. The times that Clemson had been in severe trouble this year, it seemed to be because Deshaun Watson and the offense weren't rolling. The defense, though, had shown some cracks as well. And, boy, the whole thing caved in here because Pittsburgh came from behind for this win. Clemson had this win in the fourth quarter, wind up allowing 43 points in that contest. It's 464 yards allowed, which is really unacceptable from a team that is looking to participate in the college football Final Four. So I think if you just take an overview of Clemson's season, I feel like this loss here was a little bit different than the way we've seen them struggle before. But I think you do have to add in there that this defense, while it's been praised an awful lot this season, has had their moments of not looking very good. And certainly Pittsburgh, an offense that has scored on everybody this year, did the job here, 43-42, clutch field goal to win the game. Luckily for Clemson, we're going to find out in a few minutes here, but luckily for Clemson, Washington and Michigan decided to lose their games too.
Well, I think that's Clemson's one saving grace is that they were up there, and then you had 3 and 4 also losing, and that really does help them. It'll probably cushion the fall a little bit when these rankings come out in a few minutes. We'll get to them as soon as they come out. So in terms of the fall getting cushioned, think that's probably – I think they will still be in the top 4 when it comes out. In terms of who I think got helped the most, I think you go back to earlier this season when Penn State lost to Pitt, and there was a big question now of Penn State's got the quote-unquote inside track to the Big Ten championship game, assuming they win at Rutgers, which I don't see how they don't win at Rutgers, and then assuming they can beat Michigan State at home, and Ohio State would beat Michigan. You have a 2-loss Penn State team playing for the Big Ten title against probably another 2-loss Big Ten team in Wisconsin. Always thought the argument was much stronger for a 2-loss Wisconsin team to make the playoffs than a 2-loss Penn State team. The gap on that argument is closing dramatically at this point in time. With Pitt getting that huge road win, it really lessens the blow of that Penn State loss earlier in the year to Pitt. Your thoughts?
Yeah, and let's not forget that in that particular game, Pittsburgh was way out in front. Penn State made a tremendous comeback in that contest, and I believe, I'm trying to remember it off the top of my head, even had a chance at the end, I think, to force overtime, Rob, but I know it wound up being a field goal game and a game where, Pitt was out to 21-0 lead, I think, and then a really big second quarter lead, then the big rally by Penn State. So, to play that game as close as they did, I don't think anybody's going to examine it the way I just did. They're going to look at it and see 3-point loss to Pitt, Pitt beat Clemson at Clemson. When they're going over strength of schedule stuff, it winds up looking like a real good loss. So we'll see. I tend to agree with you that the blow was softened for Clemson by the other team losing. I know you and I were texting a bit Saturday night, or instant messaging Saturday night as these things were happening. And my first thought Saturday night, as all the dominoes were falling, was that Clemson would remain and Louisville would sneak in, so it would be Alabama, Ohio State, Clemson, and Louisville. We'll see how this whole thing shakes out.
I think the one big interesting question that is going to just have to be answered, and it won't even be answered tonight because, again, there's still quite a few more weeks of rankings to come out. And could there be some kind of scenario where you've got a one-loss, let's say, Ohio State team that doesn't play for the Big Ten title, or you've got a one-loss Louisville team that doesn't play for the ACC title, or one of these one-loss teams, by not having to play an extra game, could actually benefit if there were to be an upset in one of the conference championship games?
Yeah, that's the beauty of the whole thing, right? Because certainly when they went from the BCS format to this new format, I don't think anybody anticipated what we're looking at right here on Tuesday night. Now, like you said, there's still a lot of football left to be played, and we're painting scenarios that may or may not happen, but I'm sure that when they switched from the BCS format to the new 14 college playoff format, they didn't see this one coming. They certainly didn't see a scenario where two one-loss teams with the eye test probably be better than rivals in their conference who made the championship game and had two losses. So, the beauty is going to be in the eye of the beholder here. It's very hard to pin down what the committee values of importance because there's no real set rule on, you could favor strength of schedule with one team and favor the eyeball test with another team. There's really no set credentials here that we follow that we can tell what they're going to be, what their vote is going to be. So we'll see. Like you said earlier, though, there's a lot to be played. I love the point you brought up about Wisconsin because, if anybody benefits from schedule strength, Rob, it's Wisconsin. You and I talked about the gauntlet they were going to have to play way back second, third podcast of the year as we went week by week. And now you look at Wisconsin and you see a 2-point win over LSU, which looks better and better every day. You see only a 7-point loss at Michigan with Alex Hornibrook in his first college football start ever at quarterback. You see them play Ohio State to 30-23 as a huge underdog in that contest, missing two starting linebackers. This team, I think strength of schedule-wise, benefits better than anybody. inside that Big Ten. So if they can do their share of the business here, of course, it'll be a moot point if they go ahead and win the Big Ten title. I think they're going to be in. But the strength of schedule certainly is good for Wisconsin, no doubt about it.
Yeah, I think that assuming they take care of business in their final couple of games and they win the Big Ten championship, I think they'd have the strongest argument of any of the two-loss teams to have a seat at the table. Let's move on to Michigan and Iowa next. We talked about this game last week. Neither of us thought that Michigan was going to lose the game. I did think Iowa would stick around. I didn't think they were as bad of a team as their record had indicated. And, boy, not only did they stick around, they got themselves in position to kick a game-winning field goal as time expired. What went wrong for Michigan on Saturday night?
You know, it's an interesting game. And, you know, you watch enough football over a lifetime, Rob, and you know that whenever a favorite, the old phrase is if a favorite lets an underdog stick around long enough, they wind up getting themselves into trouble, and that's really what happened with Michigan here. When you look at what Michigan has done, I'll just use this. This is really what happened to Michigan. In the first half of games this season, since we do a point spread show, I'll give you the point spread numbers. Michigan was 7-1 against the spread coming into that Iowa game in the first half, and they were 6-2 over the total. They had outscored opponents in the first half prior to the Iowa game, 264-38. The average point differential in their first halves this year was 25 points. They're ahead by almost 4 touchdowns after every first half. That didn't happen against Iowa. It was close. Then it remained close after 3 quarters. And then, of course, in the fourth quarter at home in Kinnick Stadium, Iowa stole that ball game. So Michigan was tested, I guess is the best way to put it. They were tested finally in a first half. The only other game where they saw that kind of closeness at halftime was the Colorado game. That, of course, the game where Cephalefau, the quarterback for Colorado, went down and didn't play the second half, made a dramatic difference in that contest. Michigan rolled to a 45-21 victory or a 45-28 victory at the end there. But, you know, they've been the ultimate bully this season. First half bully, right off the opening kickoff. Buried teams. The second halves have been, you know, anticlimactic where Michigan is concerned. This one wasn't, and, you know, the noose gets a little bit tighter as the game winds down and you don't have that big lead, and we saw Michigan fail in this instance. I'm really surprised that they did. Offensively, Rob, to think that Michigan only averaged 3.3 yards per play in that contest really is not what we've seen of them all season long. So tough loss. Again, huge favorite like Clemson that fell. The only difference being Clemson was home, Michigan was on the road. But I still find the Michigan loss extremely surprising as well. There was no way in my mind, the way Iowa had been playing this season, that they could win outright. Covering a point spread is a different deal, but to win straight up, I didn't see that one coming, that's for sure.
Not a lot of people did, and I did read a very interesting article on ESPN today where somebody, just for the heck of it, did a $2 moneyline parlay on USC, Iowa, and Pitt, and it paid out 396-1. So that's how improbable Vegas thought it would be to have number 2, number 3, and number 4 all lose on the same day.
And that's quite the payoff. I mean, and so, you have to do those things as just a flyer, right? That's only a flyer. That's not a legitimate opinion that all 4 of those are going to lose. But, hey, sometimes those flyers pay off, and certainly that one did.
It did, and let's talk about the third game of that 3 that I just mentioned. That would be USC-Washington. We both thought that USC was a very good football team going into this game. Situationally, you thought maybe at home Washington's been in a couple of big games before this year and has been able to get the job done. They weren't able to do it against a very good USC team on Saturday night, and I think that they were the fourth team. I think that they are probably going to be hurt the most by this loss in terms of their ability to make the playoffs with a very, very, very weak out-of-conference strength of schedule.
Yeah, 128th out of 128 is what I read today, so that strength of schedule isn't going to get you anywhere. For Washington, that's a brutal loss. I think it damages their hopes of getting back into that college football Final Four. I mean, you'd have to see a rash of losses the way we saw Saturday for them to climb their way back in. But, in watching USC this year, Rob, when tested by physical football teams, Alabama and Stanford, USC didn't come through. They were soft beginning of the year, and I sort of made note of that and played against them in certain situations, but they were anything but soft against Washington. Washington's got a really devastating ground attack that was held to 17 yards on 27 carries, less than 1 yard per carry. When you shut the Washington ground game down and then put it upon the shoulders of Jake Browning, who had been gaining so much national praise, you wind up with the numbers that you see, 17 of 37, 45.9% completions. Jake Browning in the passing game couldn't carry the load. USC, give them credit. At the line of scrimmage, they won that football game. And then Sam Darnold has made a huge difference in that offense. They're far more productive than they were earlier with Max Brown. And right now, Clay Helton, whose job many thought was in danger earlier this year, no longer in danger, I wouldn't think. They have played tremendous down the stretch, barring a loss to UCLA, crosstown rival. And I think he's has pretty good footing right now out there in Trojan land. A big win for USC, and it took them a while to get going this year, but boy, at the last month or so, they really rolled.
Well, Rob, I don't know if you are privy to the rankings. They are starting to come out. I will just run through some of them for you, and then as we get to the top, if you're looking, we'll talk about it. If you're not, I'll let you give a guess as to what you think the order is going to be. Well, I'm not going to go through them all, but I'm going to mention this. Number 21 is Western Michigan. Number 20, Boise State. Very, very important for which out of not the Big Five power conferences would get one of those New Year's Six bowl games. So that's very important to note right now. 21 Western Michigan, 20 Boise State, 19 Tennessee, 18 Nebraska, 17 Florida State, 16 LSU, 15 Auburn, 14 West Virginia. USC jumps to 13, Utah at 12, Oklahoma State at 11, Colorado at 10, Oklahoma, Big 12, back in the top 10. Oklahoma, number 9. Oklahoma plays West Virginia this week. We'll be talking about that game in a little while. Number 8 is Penn State. And that is all I see so far. So we will get the rest of them as soon as I get them to load up here on the computer. But any surprises out of what I just went over with you, Rob?
Real quick, I'll just add to it, Rob, because I do have the TV monitor on and I'm watching it as we talk here. Wisconsin is 7, so they've gotten that far. Penn State 8, Wisconsin 7. We'll see what 6 through 1 is. Oklahoma becomes real intriguing at this point, Rob, because they, with 2 losses and with what we see going on in the college football landscape, it's not impossible that you can squeeze in with 2 losses. And what Oklahoma benefits from here, you mentioned half of it, the fact that they're going to play West Virginia, who's ranked 14 right now as of tonight. But after that, they're going to get to play Oklahoma State, who's ranked 11. As long as Oklahoma State wins again this week, that OU game, they could wind up beating 2 top 15 teams in the last 2 weeks and then not have a Big 12 championship game to play, sit back and watch and see what happens. They're not quite out of it yet at number 9.
No, I think you and I had really written off the Big 12 2 or 3 weeks ago when we were doing this. We wrote them off for dead, and again, it's college football. As soon as you do something like that, you know something crazy is going to happen. And, I mean, that's exactly what we had happen this week. I think it's really interesting that Penn State and Wisconsin are right there. They're both on track for a potential big showdown. So a lot of this stuff is still going to sort itself out, and they are all out. I'm guessing you've seen it, Rob. Any surprises with, I'll just run through for the listeners real quick. We got Wisconsin at 7, 6 is Washington. Louisville stays out of the top 4. They're at number 5. Clemson stays in at number 4. Michigan holding at number 3. Ohio State up to 2. Bama number 1. A lot of Big Ten teams up in the top 8. Half of them are Big Ten teams. Any thought on that? Is the Big Ten Conference really that strong to be worthy of 4 spots in the top 8?
Well, it's I think when you consider the Louisville and Washington strength of schedules, which we did talk about earlier with Washington, Louisville is a little bit better. At least they played Clemson, Florida State. But that's really what's kept those 2 teams out, right? The strength of schedule is better for Michigan, and that's probably what has them in there. For Louisville, this is going to be interesting, Rob, because 2 and 3 are going to play one another, right? Ohio State's going to play Michigan. Somebody's going to lose that game. At that point in time, there's going to be an opening for Louisville or Washington. I think if Louisville just sticks with their business, they can still find their way in. They're in a pretty good spot here, knowing that Ohio State or Michigan has to lose a game. So for Louisville, I feel okay. The fact that Washington is behind Louisville now at 6, I find it hard to think that Washington could jump them, although the Apple Cup game does present Washington with a Washington State team that sits at 22 in the country right now. I just don't think it's going to be enough strength of schedule-wise for them, though. So I don't think that it's a bad spot for Louisville, maybe a frustrating spot, but not a bad one. And then we'll have to see that, the Big Ten is going to, those 4 teams are going to work that all out. I don't know that there's enough room. I'm trying to do the whole thing in my head while we talk here. It's a little bit difficult, but I'm trying to think if there's enough room for 2 Big Ten teams at the end of all of this to be sitting there inside that top 4. It's kind of difficult to see. We'll find out. But I think Louisville's probably frustrated tonight, but in a decent spot.
I think you're right. I think it's much more likely that you were to see Clemson, let's say, at number 2 or number 3, and Louisville in at number 4. I think just based on the way all this is going to play itself out, there's a better chance you get 2 ACC teams in the playoff than there is of you getting 2 Big Ten teams in the playoff.
Yeah, as we speak right now, and like we say, we're doing this on the fly, you and I, trying to figure out from now through the championship games and what could possibly happen, every scenario. But I think when we're looking at the way things are situated right now, Louisville, in all likelihood, ends the season as a 1-loss team. They'll end the season with a very good loss to Clemson. They lost the game, but it was not a bad loss by any stretch. I think, the biggest thing for them, Rob, let's just think back to a few days ago. How about they're losing 12-10 at the end of 3 quarters to Wake Forest and beat Wake Forest 34-0 in the 4th quarter? If they do make this Final Four, they're going to look back on that 4th quarter. That's the saving grace to their season. Or at least if they get a trip to the college football Final Four, it'll be their saving grace into that 14 playoff because they were on the verge of losing that game. And a 34-0 4th quarter makes it look real good. 44-12.
Rob, you're right. We're really doing this on the fly, and I still do see one relatively decent path for the Big Ten to have 2, and that would be Ohio State beats Michigan, but doesn't get to play for the title. If Ohio State doesn't lose again this year, how can you drop them from 2 to 5? It's going to be a really hard sell to move them back 3 spots. If you think they're that good right now and they don't do anything else wrong the rest of the season except not get to play in their conference title game, you could probably see them in the playoff. And then if the winner of Penn State, Wisconsin is a strong enough 2-loss team, maybe they're in there as a 3 or a 4 themselves.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely valid point. I feel that between those two, and nothing's a slam dunk. We know that. Nothing's a slam dunk. But the closer thing to a slam dunk would be if Wisconsin were to win that Big Ten championship game that we just painted there over Penn State, because I went through the Wisconsin schedule before. It's just it would be very hard to argue any reason why they would be disallowed from being in the Final Four. The only thing you would think of is, well, no, they would be a Big Ten champion. I mean, it would be hard to not have them in with Ohio State. So I think that's probably the closest thing to a slam dunk if it worked out that way. If Penn State were to win the game, and how about 2 teams from the East Division being in the Final Four? That would be crazy. Not impossible, certainly, but a little bit crazy.
Well, I think it would be a really tough sell, at least in Happy Valley. I don't think they would quite understand why there's a Big Ten champion and they're not playing in the playoffs, but Ohio State, who can't even win their own division, is playing in the playoffs. However, we have seen it before when it was just the good old BCS rankings that it is possible for someone who is not the champion of their conference, Alabama, to not only make the playoff, but win it. So it has been done before.
It certainly has. And what would make the Penn State fan base rip the hair out of their heads even more would be, not only doesn't Ohio State win the Big Ten championship and make it if Penn State were to be left out as a Big Ten champion, but Ohio State didn't even beat Penn State. So they would be really crazed. There's a lot. There's certainly a lot to sift through there. I wouldn't envy the committee. There's a certain amount of chaos, and we've talked about a bunch of it here so far, that could happen that would make any decision that they make second-guessed. And that's what they were trying to get away from, Rob, with the BCS. And I don't know that this formula is any better than the BCS was if we look at it now. But certainly they were trying to get away from the controversy, how teams get left out, how teams get invited in, and, you know, the difference between humans and computers is supposed to make a world of difference. But I don't know, you could take 2 avid college football fans. We could take yourself and myself and not necessarily believe in the argument, but we could take opposite arguments and make really valid points each way, stuff that couldn't be disputed. So this is going to be...
Rob, not only could you could do that for many different scenarios. Louisville over Clemson, Ohio State over Penn State, Wisconsin being in. I mean, you could argue either side of almost any of those and have some numbers and statistics to back you up. Now, I know these rankings that come out really have absolutely no effect on your power ratings and your numbers. If you have them ready, just for fun, what would your lines be on the matchups as the playoff committee has them right now?
As the playoff committee has them, okay, so we would be looking at 1 versus 4 would be Alabama versus Clemson, correct?
Yes.
Clemson came out as 4. So in that game on a neutral field, right now, I would say that line comes out Alabama minus 10.5 on a neutral field. And the second game would be Ohio State,
which we're going to get to see that game in just 2 weeks anyway, not on a neutral field, but I will get to see it nonetheless.
And if they played it today, I would make Ohio State the 2-point favorite on a neutral field. So you've got a 10.5 and a 2. Obviously, the Alabama power rating is through the roof this year. They're 7 better than anybody right now. The next closest team to Alabama is Ohio State power ratings-wise. And in that game, on a neutral field, once again, Alabama would be a 7-point favorite. Interesting to note, Rob, that where my power ratings are concerned, if they ask, you know, and I've often said, if they want to get the right 4 teams, just go to Las Vegas ask the odds makers, ask the handicappers who make power ratings, and we'll give you the best 4 teams. The way I see it right now, with my power ratings, it should be Alabama 1, Ohio State 2, Michigan 3, Louisville 4. I would have Clemson out of there right now by a slim half point. Louisville about a half point better power rating-wise than Clemson. Of course, all this subject to change, but I think that's the way the odds makers see it right now. If Louisville were to play Clemson again on a neutral field, Louisville would be a half a point favorite. It's interesting. It's great fodder to talk about, and we got a lot of important football coming up, that's for sure.
We most certainly do. We have some important games this weekend. One of them, Thursday night game between Louisville and Houston. We've seen Houston potentially spoil the season of Oklahoma, or as we've seen, maybe not so much, as Oklahoma, like you said, has a couple of more chances to get a couple wins against top 15 programs. They're sitting at 9 right now. The way I look at it is, at the very least, they would be able to jump a 2-loss Big Ten champion. If that champion happens to be Penn State, I think that it would be more impressive, at least as far as I'm concerned, to see them go to West Virginia and win, and then beat Oklahoma State, versus seeing Penn State beat Rutgers and Michigan State and then win a conference championship game. I think that Oklahoma would probably jump them in that case, but they got to take care of business themselves before they can worry about everything else that happens. But in terms of Louisville, Houston, can they give them a game here? Is there? It's a true road game for Louisville. Kind of surprising to see them step out and play a game like this at this time of the season. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and I think, as we talked earlier, Rob, when you go over that non-conference schedule of Louisville, they were going to have to schedule somebody of substance, right? And I think that coming off of last year and heading into this year, and even 5 weeks into this season, what the heck? I mean, Tom Herman was the hottest coach in the country. His name bandied about all over the place, especially to LSU. Greg Ward Jr., potential on the potential short list of Heisman Trophy candidates, and then all of a sudden the roof caved in on Houston. To me, this acts as a Super Bowl for the Houston Cougars. Certainly they are going to welcome this invitation to Louisville, have them come in, and they're going to try and restore all the wrongs in their season right here with one victory. They've come up with a couple of wins lately. They're not impressive. I mean, Central Florida has made a great turnaround, don't get me wrong. As far as improvement in the power ratings are concerned, nobody's improved more power ratings-wise this year from start till now than Central Florida has. Scott Frost has done a tremendous job. But Houston plays them at home and wins 31-24. They don't cover a point spread. They played Tulane last week. They win 30-18. They don't cover a point spread. Prior to that, they had lost to SMU, beat Tulsa by 1 touchdown, lose to Navy. It's just not been a good season. Ever since that Oklahoma game to start the year, really hasn't been all that impressive. To beat Lamar and Texas State, certainly not good. So the roundabout point I'm trying to make here is, for Houston, this is their game. And they're going to play Louisville with 100% focus. We know they're capable. They certainly have the athletes on that team to give Louisville trouble, and Louisville's gotten themselves into trouble a couple of times this year. The Virginia game most recently, and then we talked about Wake Forest last week, trailing after 3 quarters. So it can be done. I'd expect a good effort out of Houston. For Louisville, they're going to hope that the committee still thinks Houston's a really good team, because they don't have much left. After this, they have to play Kentucky, and the fact that Kentucky, which was in line for an SEC East Division title, or a potential shot to win that title, they come up with 2 straight losses the last 2 weeks in SEC East Division play. So that pretty much writes Kentucky off. A victory there by Louisville doesn't mean too much. It's all they got left, Rob. So for Louisville, you have to win, certainly win in a convincing fashion. And for Houston, you want to salvage your season with this victory. Yeah, it's a pretty good game, and I would expect that we'll see both teams come in here extremely focused.
I absolutely do think it will be a great game. I give assuming Louisville's offense plays to their full potential, I don't see them losing this game. But if they're to commit some foolish mistakes, turnovers, or give up a lot of big plays and let Houston stick around, you get the same situation where, hey, the home team starts believing. We've seen it with Iowa beating Michigan, and I see this as a similar kind of situation. Houston, decent record, probably could have been better. They lost a few they shouldn't have lost if they wanted to obviously play for the playoff, but still a very good football team as far as I'm concerned. I agree. There's no way Louisville is looking past Houston to Kentucky. That would be unimaginable. It's just a matter of, is Houston going to have enough to be able to beat a really good Louisville team?
Yeah, it's interesting too, Rob. What helps Louisville here is the fact that it's a Thursday night game, national television, 8 o'clock, a standalone game. I guess the NFL is on the other channel, so perhaps a lot of eyeballs on the NFL as well. But for Louisville to look really good on national television against this Houston team does help them. They don't get lost on a card of, 50, 55 college football games on Saturday where there's 8 other channels that people could be watching with better games. So to be a standalone game just about on Thursday night, I know that Arkansas State plays Troy. That's a big one in the Sun Belt, but for the most part, 9 out of 10 college football fans are going to watch Louisville-Houston rather than Arkansas State-Troy. It's helpful that the scheduling here for Louisville. And as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of helpful for Houston, too, because they do want to take back all the wrongs to this season. Boy, their schedule, as I just looked at it before, Houston, when they won that Oklahoma game, they really should have ran the table to this point. It wasn't a difficult schedule, but they couldn't get it done. We'll see if they can get it done. They're a 14-point home underdog on Thursday night. Total in that game opened at 70. It's been bet down to 68.
I want to move out to the Pac-12 because here's something that we had talked about USC's coach being on the hot seat. I want to just lay out a little scenario where not only is USC's coach not on the hot seat, USC is playing for a Pac-12 championship. We've got a huge game we're going to talk about now with Washington State and Colorado. If Washington State were able to go on the road and get a big win at Colorado, and then Utah were to turn around and lose to Colorado the following week, USC could still represent the Pac-12 South in the conference title game. But before any of that can happen, they would need Colorado to lose to Washington State at home this weekend. Let's break that one down.
Yeah, it's a huge game, right? For Washington State, their path can't be secured, really, to the Pac-12 title game unless they beat Washington or unless Washington were to lose one more time. Right now, as it sits, Washington State and Mike Leach 7-0 in that Pac-12 North Division. Washington Huskies 6-1. If they finish in a tie with one loss, that will have meant that Washington defeated Washington State in the Apple Cup, and Washington would then go to the Pac-12 championship game. So for Washington State, it's not of the utmost importance what is of the utmost importance is that they beat Washington when the time comes. For Colorado, this is extremely important. One loss, you talked about it. Not only do they have to play this game, but then they have to play Utah. For Colorado, win out, and they're in. Pretty easy math there. But this is not going to be an easy game. Certainly Washington State, ever since that Mike Leach tirade way back after the second week of the season, they have been a different football team. I will say this. Defensively, they're still very suspect. And it's a team that defensively likes to sell out quite often, get pressure on the quarterback, try and force mistakes with intense pressure. I don't know that Colorado and Cephaleufa will cave to that type of pressure here. This is a multi-pronged offense that has a lot of weaponry and a lot of ways to move the football. So as long as Colorado can, avoid the strip sacks, stuff like that Washington State lives off of, they should be okay in this game. You wonder, Washington State at altitude here, will that make a difference? But certainly Colorado's going to have their hands full on the other side with Luke Falk and that passing game that Washington State brings to the table. Interesting game, but like I say, it's on the importance factor, and this is not to say anybody's coming to lay down in a game like this, but on the importance meter, this is huge for Colorado and not as huge for Washington State, the one that counts, and the coach will never let them know this because the coach wants them to play every single game just as hard. But the one that counts is going to be the Washington game when they meet for the Apple Cup. The winner of that one is likely, I'm assuming Washington doesn't lose one more. I don't think they will. But if the winner of that game is going to represent the North. And for Colorado, like I say, win out and you're there. We saw some movement in this game on the total, some downward movement, Rob. A game that you look at surface value, you see a very high-flying Washington State offense and a Colorado offense that's very productive as well. And the game opened 60. In fact, just as we speak now, this game has moved back to 60. It took a little downward tick to 58.5, 59, but it's come back. We see solid 60s across the board. Colorado has gone from a 3.5-point favorite now to a 4.5-point favorite. So a little bit of money on the Colorado side. People thinking 60 is the right number in this one. Very interesting contest. I've liked Colorado all season long, and when push has come to shove with this team, they've answered the bell. Mike McIntyre, give him credit. It's not a team that's been in this position a lot in recent memory. Neither is Washington State. You've got two teams that aren't used to going out and trying to secure divisional titles. So this will be an interesting football game.
I think just based on the situational play of it alone, I would lean a little towards Colorado. Like you said, not that Washington State's going to come in there and lay down, but it's only natural to know what the situation means. It's only natural to know that your biggest rival is waiting for you next week with everything on the line. Going on the road to a tough place to play, probably lean towards Colorado in that one myself, just from a situational perspective alone. That'll take us to a big game in the SEC, a makeup game. We've talked about this game probably more than any other game all season. Florida and LSU are going to be making up a Florida home game in Baton Rouge on Saturday afternoon. Odd start time of 1 o'clock, a little bit of TV politics in that one. It was ESPN's week for the first pick of SEC games. That doesn't happen too often. This was one of the weeks that it was. And they obviously picked that game, best game on the card. And CBS said, no, you're not going to interfere with our national 3:30 window. They're showing, I think it might be Tennessee or somebody at 3:30. Not going to be nearly as good as this game, but one of the rules was with Florida agreeing to go to LSU, the game had to be an afternoon kickoff, so they're going to play 12 noon Central, 1 o'clock at LSU. I guess Florida's really wishing they found a way to play this game in Gainesville a few weeks ago. I think that LSU's looking a lot better now. I think that they've really improved under Ed Orgeron as they've gone along here, and this is going to be a much, much tougher game for Florida now than it would have been 6 weeks ago. What do you think?
Oh, it certainly is, Rob. We just went over my power ratings a little bit ago, and what I failed to mention, because it wasn't really noteworthy, the conversation we were having then, but what I didn't mention is how high in these power ratings LSU sits right now. LSU is the 6th best team in the country according to power ratings. They're in fact, I would call them 5th because their number is tied with Clemson's. If they played Clemson on a neutral field today, the game would be a pick 'em. So for LSU, who sits at number 16 in the college football rankings tonight, it's too little too late where a Final Four berth is concerned. But, boy, you watched them play last week against Arkansas, and we analyzed that game on last week's show. They looked every bit of one of the 4 best teams in the country last week. And I'll say that for the week before. They lost 10-0 to Alabama. Alabama couldn't put them away until there was about 3 minutes left in the game, I think, when they kicked that field goal to make it 10-0. LSU has played that Alabama team as good as anybody has all season long. They are on a good roll right now, and it helps Florida to know that with a 2-game lead in the loss column, they're in decent shape in the East Division anyway, even if they do lose this game. I know you don't go into the game with that mentality, but they do have some cushion to play with and still win that Eastern Division. I just don't know, in watching the Florida offense, how they're going to dent the LSU defense. It'll have to be work of the Florida defense that helps out in this game. They'll have to try and rattle Danny Etling. We saw Fournette get hurt slightly last week, right? He went to the bench a couple of times, came back, had some big runs, but Darius Geis has been tremendous as well, and Danny Etling and the receivers are finding their way when given time. So I don't know. This is, like you say, Florida would have loved to play this thing in Gainesville. Not going to happen. They're going to play in Death Valley. Death Valley is not the same in the daytime as it is at nighttime, but I'd still have to favor the way this team has responded to the interim head coach, Ed Orgeron. We know he's probably not going to get this job, but, boy, he's done wonders in picking this team's confidence back up and making them look more like the team we thought they were going to be to start the season. They've done well where point spread is concerned under his watch, so I don't know why they really wouldn't here. I think it'll be a lower scoring game because both defenses are so good. But, right now I just happen to like LSU quite a bit, and I think they're a good team to be on the rest of the way out right through bowl season. We'll see how they get matched up, but I can't see any real scenario unless there's a point spread that's just crazy out of line where my first reaction wouldn't be to play LSU in their remaining games.
Yeah, and I think that, this one's sitting at just about the 2-touchdown range. I think that the fact that this game is at LSU is just going to make a big difference. I really think that Florida they're not going to be able to stick with LSU for 4 quarters. They're not as physical of a football team. They're not as deep of a football team. And again, it's going to be a tough situation, like you said, not the same in the day as at night, but you're still sending an inexperienced quarterback into a situation that is not good for an inexperienced quarterback, and I think LSU will take care of business and open the door back up for Tennessee to represent the SEC East in their championship game.
I'd add to what we're saying here, Rob, just from a fundamental standpoint. When you go over Florida's schedule this season, and I'll just run the teams off for you: Massachusetts, Kentucky, North Texas, Tennessee, Vanderbilt, Mizzou, Georgia, and Arkansas, and then, of course, South Carolina. We haven't seen Florida play a wide array of teams that can run the football, teams that are predicated on the run, teams that run power right at you, use their offensive line strength and their running back ability. The only couple of times where you could say that, where Florida's been concerned, was playing Brett Bielema's Arkansas Razorbacks. In that game, Arkansas ran for 223 yards. That's a very good Florida defense, but against the run, they couldn't hold up against Arkansas. And back early in the season, when Jalen Hurd was with these Tennessee Volunteers and Alvin Kamara wasn't hurt, Tennessee ran for 179 yards against this team as well. Now, in between, inexplicably, Missouri ran for 265 yards against Florida. So the immediate reaction from, if you took 100 college football fans and said, what's good about the Florida Gators? Oh, their defense is great. And it's not a lie by any stretch. However, when you examine what they've done against the run in some of these situations with teams that are halfway capable, and I wouldn't even consider Missouri to be halfway capable of running the football when Florida played them. Florida played them back on October 15th, and they gave up 265 rushing yards. So I think there's fundamentally some hay to be made there by the LSU Tigers, where they can have Danny Etling turn around handoff, make an established run, and throw off of that. Just another reason why you might like LSU. Numbers high, no doubt about it. You don't want to get into laying 14 points with LSU. That number's since been bet down to 13.5. But there is, it's feasible that LSU can cover this point spread on ground game and defense alone. You could see something in the vicinity of 27-10, and it's not it wouldn't be considered a rout, but it's a 17-point win and a cover.
Rob, I know we did not, I didn't put this on the list of games to have you discuss, but I'm sure you are prepared to talk about it nonetheless. I want to go out to the Mountain West for a minute, and I only do this because the rankings just came out, and you've still got Boise State ahead of Western Michigan, but one of the qualifiers in that is you have to win your conference, and this is probably a very big game for Boise State more than it is for San Diego State or Wyoming in terms of the ability to be that team. But if you look at Wyoming, they're going to play San Diego State at home, then they go to New Mexico. This game against San Diego State is probably their best chance to lose another one and cede control of that division back to Boise State. They're about a 9-10 point underdog at home. Are they going to be able to beat San Diego State, or do you think that Boise will regain control of their own destiny, so to speak?
Well, the best thing that happened to Boise State was UNLV last Saturday. And nobody expected UNLV to score 69 points in 69-66 final, and however many overtimes there were. That was another one. You talk about a day where you and I have just gone over big teams that lost big chances at a college football Final Four spot. And a couple of them didn't even lose that spot. Michigan and Clemson still maintained their spots. But there were other games, this being one of them, the UNLV-Wyoming game, where teams blew huge chances. When you think to what Thursday night could have meant for North Carolina had they beaten Duke, Virginia Tech came back and lost on Saturday to Georgia Tech. UNC could be sitting in perfect position now to go play in an ACC title game, but they couldn't beat an undermanned Duke team. Teams blew chances all across the country, and the Wyoming loss was certainly one that they may regret because there's nobody playing better football in that conference right now than San Diego State. Wyoming needs to run the football. Craig Bohl's done a tremendous job. Came over from North Dakota State where he won 2-3 national championships in a row. It took him 3 years to build this program. He, you look at off-season quotes from him, and he had to go through an extreme weeding out process to get this team to the point where they felt like they would come to practice every day and buy into the program. They've done well. But Brian Hill's going to be a marked man come Saturday. The running back for Wyoming, and San Diego State is very good at stopping the run. And the other side of that coin is Donnell Pumphrey for San Diego State should find much more running room against the Wyoming defense. I think Boise State's in a great spot at this point in time to gain the division lead back. I'm also curious, Rob, that, and it has to be, I haven't done full research on this yet, but it has to be because they lost to South Alabama. But I keep looking for San Diego State inside that top 25 as the team that will represent the non-Power 5 conferences in the New Year's Day 6. And they didn't crack the top 25 again tonight. So for San Diego State, it's extremely important to go out there and beat this Wyoming team, run the table, and then in a Mountain West Conference championship game, I would say that San Diego State versus Boise State will be for all the marbles. Whichever team wins that game, in all likelihood, gets the berth because Western Michigan and P.J. Fleck, that team's a great story, and they're undefeated. But they just don't have anybody left to play on their schedule. I think San Diego State, not even in the top 25 right now, could actually, with wins over Wyoming and Boise, possibly jump them. And if Boise winds up winning it all, then we know it's going to be Boise. So there's a lot, as we've said 100 times tonight, there's a lot of football left to play, but I can see where San Diego State is going to treat this game against Wyoming with extreme importance. And I can see where Boise State was very excited after that result Saturday because Brett Rippon and company, Jeremy McNichols, that happens to be one of my favorite teams in the country, and he one of my favorite quarterbacks. They can light up anybody. That would be a great, great Mountain West Conference championship game. We'll see if it happens.
Well, Rob, one more game to go, and then I have a few other questions for you. But let's take care of the last game first. We talked about it a little while ago. Oklahoma has two very good opportunities to make a case as to why they should be a two-loss team in a conference championship. I think the best thing that could happen to Oklahoma between now and Saturday is Houston beats Louisville on Thursday night. It would just take a little bit of the sting off of that Houston loss for them, and B, it would get another team that's in front of them to go behind them in the standings. But they have a big opportunity here at West Virginia on Saturday. How do you see this one shaking out? Can they take advantage of that opportunity?
Well, Bob Stoops has been really good at this type of thing, Rob, for a lot of years. And I think we went over this way back when Oklahoma lost two of their first three games, right? I think the second loss was the one to Ohio State. I'm not looking at their schedule right now, but I believe the second loss was the one where Ohio State brought the young team into Norman and defeated Oklahoma, right? So then they were 1-2 at that point in time. And along with Mississippi back then, I know our discussion was, and just about any handicapper or bettor's discussion was, are these teams, Oklahoma and Mississippi, going to hang their heads because after 3 weeks in the season, their season's basically gone, or their expectation is gone? Two teams that thought they could make it to the Final Four, or will they regroup and play well? Bob Stoops has a track record. If you go back to the early 2000s and look at times when they lost at the Cotton Bowl to Texas, and seemingly all was lost at that point in time, only to take his team and turn it around and run the table. And that's just what they're doing right now. Bob Stoops, for all his detractors, and we don't like to get involved too much in, ripping head coaches and whatnot. It's not necessarily what we do. We're more concerned with point spreads and cashing tickets. But Bob Stoops does have a lot of guys who come down hard on him, and it's true that Oklahoma's had some teams that maybe he should have done more with. But in this particular instance, he's very good at this, getting his team back up off the mat and, like I said, running the table. This is a difficult game for Oklahoma. Oklahoma a couple of weeks ago was a really, really beat-up football team. Now they've gotten a couple of bodies back, but they're still not full health. And West Virginia is an extremely tough team. Give Dana Holgorsen some credit for putting together a defense that lost so many players in the offseason and coming through with some big defensive efforts this year. I'd have to believe, though, Rob, when push comes to shove, Oklahoma is just the better team and they can win this game. And we talked about it earlier. This is an important win. If you can beat number 14 and then come back and beat number 11, that's good news for Oklahoma. I mean, it'll be all they can do, right? You can only do what you can do. And I expect them to be able to do that. I think that this might get a little more high scoring because Oklahoma has had issues defensively, and West Virginia does have personnel to strike. But if you're going to ask me, do I want Baker Mayfield or do I want Skyler? Help me here. I'm losing the name of the West Virginia quarterback now, but Skyler, I'll think of it eventually. But the difference in quarterbacking is huge for me. Mayfield just doesn't make as many mistakes.
Skyler Howard.
There you go, Skyler Howard. I spaced on that. But Skyler Howard, while he's a tough kid, is an inconsistent quarterback and not necessarily a accurate thrower at all times, where Baker Mayfield and that offense under Lincoln Riley is designed to be accurate on timing and whatnot. I think if you're going to ask me where the difference lies between these two teams, it lies right there. And it's a substantial gap. Howard has had big games, and he's capable of having another big game. But going based on consistency, I would think Oklahoma should win that contest. And then if it all comes down to Oklahoma State, wow, we know that those have been some real, real battles over the years, and that could be big for the Sooners.
Well, I guess here's two questions for you. The first question is, would you agree with my assumption that a two-loss Oklahoma team has a much better chance to make the playoff than a one-loss West Virginia team?
Well, I guess the Houston loss just doesn't look good right now. Now, I'll say this. Oklahoma, you're right in the fact that Louisville might fall behind them if they lose, but it also helps Oklahoma's resume, right? If Houston wins that game, it makes the Oklahoma loss look a little bit better. The Ohio State loss, I think, even though it was at home, is very, very understandable. We see how powerful a team Ohio State is now. So if I'm just taking their losses into consideration, I think that Oklahoma would really want Louisville to lose in that game against Houston. That's a tough call. Two-loss Oklahoma team better than a one-loss West Virginia team. Of course, West Virginia's coming from farther back, right? They're coming from number 14, which is harder for them. I think overall Oklahoma's just a better team, and I guess that's the way I would view it, Rob, that Oklahoma two-loss is better than a one-loss West Virginia. We'll see. They're going to put it on the field this week, but I guess I would agree with that.
The second thing is really just a hypothetical. What if the referees knew the rules of the game? What if Oklahoma State's coach knew the rules of the football game, and Oklahoma State only had one loss? Wouldn't that be something?
Yeah, it certainly would, because you can make the case that Oklahoma State wouldn't be number 11 tonight. You make the case that Oklahoma and Oklahoma State might even be reversed, and Oklahoma State would be extremely close to that top four. their results aren't the prettiest of all, but they happen to be mostly wins, and that's all people are usually concerned with is, in most cases 11-1 trumps 10-2. But boy, oh boy, that Central Michigan game is supposed to be a W in the Oklahoma State column. And if they did have that right now, like you say, if everybody understood the rules at the time, which even the announcers didn't know the rules at the time, then we'd be having a far different conversation here right now. That being said, Oklahoma State and Oklahoma is still going to be a barn burner no matter what. And I think at this point in time, if you know you're not going to the college football 14 playoff, Rob, everybody in that, let's say 7 to 15 range, 8 to 15 range, they're all playing for the bigger payout bowl games. You want to get invited to one of those ones where all these payouts are different in these bowl games. You don't want to get stuck fourth team from the Big 12 and go play on December 28th when you could be playing on New Year's Day for a lot more money. So there's still a lot of incentive here for a bunch of these teams, and we're going to see a lot of good football down the stretch here. For Oklahoma State, every week is big for them. So we'll see what they do this week as well. But back to the Oklahoma-West Virginia game very, very quickly. Oklahoma right now only a 2.5-point road favorite. 8 o'clock at night in Morgantown. It's not going to be easy. So we'll see. Oklahoma's gone to tough venues before and pulled out victories. But this is going to be an extremely tough ball game for them, but a very important one.
Now, I know you haven't had a lot of time to digest these rankings and really look into it and forecast out because they came out while we were recording our podcast this evening. But just looking at, let's say, 1 to 10, or if you want to go even lower, what do you think the lowest spot somebody's ranked now? Where are they in the rankings, and what's the lowest spot that could jump into the top 4? Is it a number 9, Oklahoma? Is it a number 7, Wisconsin? Who behind the top 4? How low do you think this goes? How deep do you think it is? Do you think it really is only 5 or 6 teams that have a shot at the top 4? Or is there somebody a little further down that could make it jump up?
All right, so if we go through that, we've made the case for Louisville at 5, right? So we think that it's possible for them. We've made the case for Wisconsin at 7. We think it's possible for them. We've even made a case for Penn State at 8. We think it's there for them. We've made a case for Oklahoma at 9. So I guess we're going all the way down to number 10, Colorado right now, which I think it ends right there, right? I just don't see the Colorado Buffaloes, should they finish 11-2 as Pac-12 champions. That would mean that they defeated either Washington or Washington State to get there. They do have, as we talked about earlier, some big games still to play. Obviously, the Washington State game, right? If I think this through, Washington State is a ranked team at 22. The next opponent after that would be Utah, a ranked team at number 12. The next opponent after that they would hope that it would be Washington, sitting at 6, because Washington State with another loss, if Colorado was to beat them this week, probably wouldn't be a top 25 anymore. So they would hope that it would be Washington. So you're talking about beating 3 teams in the rankings in succession. Is that enough to jump you? If we look at the rest of their schedule so far this year, we talked about the Michigan game, where at halftime it was really, really close, but they wound up losing because Leofau got hurt, and the second half went to Michigan pretty heavily. Aside from that, there's not a heck of a lot to hang their hat on schedule-wise, right? Because the Pac-10 just hasn't presented much, and their non-conference schedule was, aside from Michigan, it was basically Colorado State and Iowa State, so not much there. I think it probably ends at 9. We've made a lot of cases here, and we've painted a lot of different pictures for everybody listening tonight. But I would say and I don't know if he'd agree with me, but I think it probably goes 9 deep. I still think number 9, Oklahoma, hey, it's not a good shot, but it's an outside shot that they could find their way into the Final Four.
I agree with you. I think I would like to, in an ideal world where all things are equal, but all things are not equal, we're very well aware of that, if West Virginia were to beat Oklahoma and run the table, which they should, and Oklahoma were to turn around and beat Oklahoma State, who is the only team that West Virginia has lost to, 37-20, and that final score was a little misleading. That was a lot closer game than the final score indicated it to be. Would an 11-1 Big 12 champion West Virginia get any kind of consideration? I personally don't think they would, but I think you can make some kind of argument for it, but I think they're too far back to run up 10 spots in the final 3 weeks.
Yeah, and I think that's the key to the whole thing. It might have been possible, Rob, and I think it would be possible if we could make the same case, right? If West Virginia were sitting where Oklahoma is right now at 9, then there's a real shot. But at 14, you just have to climb over so many other people, and, hey, everybody's not going to lose. Everybody's not going to open a door up for you. So they're probably just a little bit too far back at this point in time, and their remaining schedule just doesn't help them enough, right? They could beat Oklahoma, which is a bonus, but it's only going to get them so far. And then when they go to finish out the season and they're playing Iowa State, nobody really cares. There's no Big 12 championship game. Maybe for West Virginia, they wish this was 2017 where there's going to be the renewal of the Big 12 championship game and they could get a shot to go out there and beat another ranked team one more time. But I'm with you. I think there's a little too far back at this point in time. If roles had been reversed with them in Oklahoma, it's possible. And if roles had been reversed, and even if they were sitting in the 10 spot where Colorado is, maybe we could still make that case for West Virginia. But at 14, I don't think we could do it.
I agree. I guess it's that time of year where I need to ask this question. Any teams going to be having a little bit of extra motivation this week as they get into desperation mode to just make a bowl game?
Oh, and there's plenty of those, right? I think
let me get a little more specific than any. We're not going to go through them all, but any ones that stand out to you, bigger name programs, or just teams that have looked pretty good, had a couple bad losses, and need to get a break to get into the a bowl game?
Well, the most obvious one to me, Rob, would be Charlie Strong in Texas. Now, they're 1 win away. They're 5-5, so they're desperate to get that 6th win. If they don't make a bowl game, it's extremely disappointing, and it could be the exit door, or Charlie Strong could be shown the exit door if they don't do it. They have Kansas this week at Kansas. It should be simple, but when you're handicapping games and you understand the motivation for the Texas Longhorns, especially if you look on deck and see that their final game is against TCU, which could be a potential loss, you probably make the case when you go to the window that Texas is capable and probably will be very focused on routing Kansas to get themselves into a bowl game. Game opened 22.5. It's now up to 24. Obviously, money sees it the same way. A Texas team with 2 games left needs one to clinch a bowl berth. This is the one where they could win by 5 touchdowns. So, in that type of situation, I think Texas is a very desperate team. I also, you can go through that conference, Rob, and I could apply the same argument to Kansas State. Kansas State sits in 5-4 right now, so I think they are a good team to look at the rest of the way out. Bill Snyder's team, always looking to go to bowl games. But the one that sticks out like the sore thumb is Texas, just because of the circumstances that surround the program.
Yeah, I think another one that sticks out in the SEC is Mississippi State. They shocked everybody when they beat Texas A&M. They have a very, I don't want to say it's winnable, but they have a game where they're expected to be competitive, and I think they're actually a very small 1 point or so favorite against Arkansas at home this weekend. Then they get the Egg Bowl against a Mississippi team who lost their star quarterback for the year. There's a chance that they could really finish strong, get to 6-6, and see their way into a mediocre bowl game. And I think that'll be an interesting one to watch on Saturday night.
Yeah, it certainly. And Dan Mullen has gotten that program accustomed to going to bowl games. They actually don't know, any different the last few years. So when you have a program on the ascent like he's had in the past few years, you don't want to take a step backwards and not make a bowl game. So I think that Mississippi State would be one to watch. I think you really want to keep an eye on Brian Kelly and Notre Dame, right? Notre Dame sits at 4-6. They've got 2 difficult games left, Virginia Tech and USC. I said this back earlier in the season. I just don't know that Brian Kelly's long for that job. He'll probably fight for it and blame 1,000 other people for why he's not succeeding. But right now they've lost quarterback Josh Rosen for the season. week, that might tell us a lot about whether or not they can handle Ohio State in that final game of the season.
Well, Rob, that will do it for this week. But before we go, just need to remind everybody, RobVenoSports.com, great resource for not only plays from Rob, Derek, and myself, just a ton of information and statistical data, first half stuff, power lines, power rankings, injuries, weather. It really is a great resource. So make sure you get over to RobVenoSports.com and check it out. For Rob Veno, I'm Rob O'Connor. We've said a lot. We'll be back to recap it all next week and look ahead to the final true week of the regular season in college football. Thanks for listening, everybody.